Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this coffee morning. We are Flood Artist Development. If you've not been with us before, we are a company that is made to support artists to have sustainable careers and to thrive in the theatre industry. These coffee mornings run round about every month, every couple of weeks, and we speak to different creatives from across the sector, from emerging artists to mid-career to established artists, so you can get the inside scoop on how to get their jobs, basically. And today we are talking to the wonderful Emily, who is the general manager at Theatre 503, among many other things. And to kick off, we are going to ask the question we always ask everyone, and has definitely given us the most varied and wonderful answers, which is, what was your first paid role in the arts?
Hello everyone. My first paid role in the arts was in stage management. I started as a stage and production manager. It was for the OVO Theatre in St Albans for a production of Lucy Kirkwood's Mosquitoes. And it was the sort of thing that it was such a thrown into the deep end, have a go at everything, learn how to do everything right off the bat, because I did it while I was still studying. And it really just opened my eyes to sort of the professional world. I'd done a lot of Amdram before, and I really got to see I guess, the progression of how it goes from, Amdram into the professional world of theatre. And I made lots of mistakes, but I also learned so many things. And that was the sort of beauty of your first job in the arts, is learning everything the first time.
Brilliant. I think that's probably one of the most connectable roles that we've had as first paid roles, what you actually do now. So it's really
I
nice to
know.
see that it doesn't have to be so random. It can be kind of like a pipeline thing too. So do you want to talk us then through your career journey, sort of from that first role to where you are now?
Of course. Funnily enough, I always feel it's interesting to start with how I even got into the arts, which is that I went to the University of Kent and I did a English degree. And in my first term, a friend of mine was like, "I'm gonna go audition for Pride and Prejudice," and I was like, "Oh, I'll come with." I'd never read the book, but I was like, "I'm gotta have a go at it." And I ended up being cast as Mary Bennet, and I sort of joined the amateur. I know, and I ended up joining the Amateur Dramatic Society and then the Musical Theatre Society later on. And even though I started acting, I liked it. I didn't love it, and I wasn't a very good actor, so I was like, I'm gonna move on from this. And I started doing a bit of production management, sort of behind the scenes, which at our university, production management was, you kind of did a designer's job, a stage management job, a production management job, and a bit of like directing and producing as well. So you were doing sort of everything under the sun. But I loved that adrenaline. I loved the backstage part of it all. Did that, graduated into COVID, as many people did, and then took a master's at Guildhall, which was in collaborative theatre production and design, which led to me, which basically meant that you were in a group of about 10 people and you did 4 productions over the entire year. And across that, we did, and everyone had about a budget of about £500. So it was a real, like, got an idea of almost like fringe theatre, I guess, which was really great. And then yeah, and then from that I ended up taking on a lot of stage and production management roles. I worked for the Big House, who are a charity in Islington, which is also where I met Lottie. And then I did 2 roles at Theatre 503 as a freelance production manager in the beginning of 2023, funnily enough. And it was actually on a whim that I ended up applying for the general management role. I was working pretty much freelance full time as a production manager. And I had also got an administrative job at Mountview working in stage management. And I noticed that the GM role was available. And I was like, this could be something that I'm really interested in. I feel like I match a lot of the skills. I know the people. I love what they're doing with new writing. I love how ambitious and bold they are. And yeah, and now here we are working as general manager at Theatre 503. So it feels like quite a steady and sudden jump, but it's also really exciting. Yeah.
Nice. I think that's so great because you can really see how you've gone between different stage management roles,
Mm.
kind of trying different bits out. I also did Pride and Prejudice. I was Lydia Bennet, so I was one of the other sisters. But I think it's a bit of a classic.
Oh my God, love
Um,
that.
I know. And I think when you've been talking about all these roles, it'd be great if you can kind of give us a bit of a rundown
Mm.
about what they do. Because I know you mentioned at uni how the sort of production manager role encompassed a lot of different things, but especially with production management and general management
Mm.
in sort of the professional spheres, what do you actually do if you're one of these roles? Because I think we give these titles out, but no one's possibly entirely sure as to what they mean.
So it's such an interesting question as well, because I find that a lot of people I almost a lot of time ask it when I go into a role, especially when I was working as a production manager, because for a lot of people it is such a different role depending on what you do. But for me, a fringe specifically, because that's mainly what I've worked on. But what a production manager is someone who kind of oversees everything. So they're making sure that all the elements of the production are working in tandem, so that from, overseeing the production budget overall, so rather than the producer who oversees everything like fees and such, my production management role would just be looking at, how much does the set cost, how much do the lighting and sound hires cost, the very simple, that part of the budget, and then liaising with the producer on that, and then looking at kind of everything from a practicality standpoint and going, if the set, I don't know, if the set has a roof, how will that affect the lighting? Or if they want to bring in haze, how is that going to affect maybe the safety within the venue? Do you need to isolate the fire alarm? Things like that. It's a lot to do with, it's also things like risk assessments, assessing everything that's happening from both a cast perspective, but also like a get in and putting up the set perspective. I think that's for me the main elements of a production management role. And I think you can sort of task that as overseeing the production. And I think general management, specifically what I do, which is falls into more of operational side with elements of like producing and other bits and bobs, is also kind of overseeing the whole venue, overseeing, the building itself. So that's holding it, taking in phone calls, box office inquiries, checking your emails. But it's also kind of doing things like the financial management. So I run payroll. It's running things like other budgets, hires in the space, ensuring that everyone coming into the space is well held and is happy to be there, and also is enjoying themselves and what they can and can't do while they're there. Yeah, I think that kind of covers the basics of it. And then it's also just the more kind of wider aspect of that is, communicating with everyone. So that can be an audience member coming in asking an inquiry about maybe accessibility. It could be a cast member working out how they're going to get someone to see a show that's sold out. It could be a member of the board coming in who wants to introduce other people or show people around the space. And especially now as Theatre 503, we are opening a second building, hoping to in the next few years, which is our 503 studio specifically for new writers. It's now also the thing of being a general manager of two buildings and how that works and how you work around those things, both opening and both being available, and make sure that everyone's happy and safe in those places too.
Brilliant. I think that's been a really comprehensive list of kind of what these roles can involve. But I know what you mean, because every role you go into, especially as a freelancer, it is that matching up of expectation, your skills, and kind of where that meets. And kind of thinking about skills, especially with sort of working at 503 and in Fringe, you work with a lot of new writing. What do you kind of think the skills for working with that new writing are that might be slightly different to sort of a long running show like your Blood Brothers or something like that? They're already quite established.
I think the biggest one, working with new writing specifically, is there's always a great thing our artistic director, Lisa, talks about, which is that obviously holding people in such a way that they understand what it is. But one of the great things we do at 503 is we have a longer preview period. So it really gives, especially new writers and a lot of the new creatives, early career people we have coming in, get the chance to experience what it is to have 5-6 previews to, edit your work, how tech amendments work, if something goes wrong, what you can do to change it after the show's happened. And I think being able to hold that and allow people to come in and say and yeah, get that chance to change things is great. I think in terms of skills, gosh, I think the biggest one for me in terms of general management things is, weirdly enough, scheduling, which is always, excitement galore, is, working out who can go where, who's going to be holding the building then, and what's going to be happening at this point, and how can we make sure that this thing can happen and this thing can be held maybe on a Zoom while this thing is also happening in person. It's a lot of moving parts, and I think the beauty of new writing as well is, there's so much always happening, and people are so, the writing I've been reading recently has been so ambitious, and it's so great to watch like people be like, I want to put on a show with 20 characters or this huge set. The thing on our website is always like, we don't care what your play is, in the sense of that it can be as big as you want it to be. Like, we've landed people on the moon, we've had people give birth on stage, we've created this year we created like a whole graveyard on stage. It's a 64 seat fringe theatre venue. So I think for us it's all about being able to like hold people in such a positive way, and in one that also manages expectations, while also being able to be like, you can do anything in this world, even when it's so difficult financially or viably at the time it is.
Absolutely. And I think that's something I love about Theatre 503, is that it does kind of feel like anything's possible. There's no limitations on what fringe work should or shouldn't be, or can and can't include. And I think that's so freeing for artists, especially new artists coming in, where they might have seen like, oh, going out to Edinburgh, like you really want a really small cast because it's so expensive, or oh, it's such a small space, you can't do that with your set. And you guys kind of really bust those wide open and allow people to really try things and sort of bring things in.
100%.
And sort of how much sort of planning and sort of facilitation of that do you get to do in your role? Are you quite involved in kind of how that logistically looks, and is that kind of one of the things that you look at?
Yeah, so I sort of usually come into the process of, once a show, so I would like put up a show, to be sold and such, but as soon as the show is like, ready to go, in the sense of like beginning to put a team together, is sort of when I begin to get involved. And is basically the logistics part. So as well as it's making sure the practicals of people are getting paid, people are, know when they can come into the space and know what the times are that they need to be here. But it's also the elements of, I read over risk assessments and I read over set plans and lighting plans. And I'll say, well, you can do this, but if you want to do this, you'll need to, sign off on this form, or you'll need to explain why you want to do this. One of our biggest things is we allow the use of haze, but they need to explain to us why they're using this haze, because, it's a health and safety risk in order to use it. So, and it's really interesting to read those things, which feels like it shouldn't be, because it's, it's a haze safe health and safety form. But for someone to explain, a lighting designer and a director to explain, we need this because the atmosphere of the show would be completely different if we didn't have it, is so interesting, because it's something I would never have considered. I have a very like practical, logistical mind, and I've always been like, oh, haze looks really great under lights, and that's all I think about. But I've never thought about the idea that how it artistically links to the show that's going on. So it's really interesting to read those things. Yeah, I guess yeah, I think it's sort of the logistical stuff and the planning stuff is always, making sure that, I think it's such an important thing to make sure that everyone feels happy, especially in fringe theatre, because it's such it can be such a stressful environment sometimes, as people know. And one of the big things that was brought in before I even joined is that 503 don't do like a 12-hour, 14-hour shifts. They do, our get-ins are over 3 days, and they're all 10 till 6. They work within the actual 503 team's work hours. And then we have 2 longer tech days, and that's basically it. Before you go into the show, but it means it's over a longer period of time, and it means that people can have their evenings off. If you want to go and have a dinner after work, you can do that, or if you have a celebration to go to or an event, you can still make that and still be doing the work you want to do, which I feel is so much more healthy for everyone to be involved in. So much better in terms of like having done it where you've worked a 14-hour day and then come in the next day and done another 12-hour day, and that kind of experience, you get just as much done doing 3 8-hour days compared to doing 1 14-hour day, because you're so exhausted. So it's been really lovely being able to facilitate people coming into the space and getting to have their evenings off, and getting to not have to get in at 8 in the morning, sort of thing.
That's brilliant. And I think you mentioned this a bit earlier, and I'm going to come back to it in a second, about Amdram. And I think a lot of Amdram still do have that really long tech period, as well as we do sort of in the professional sphere. And it is quite something really different that what you guys do, of having those 10 till 6 get-in and tech days, especially for like bigger shows on tour as well. You can sometimes have get-ins that are really late at night or like really early in the morning because of the timing of the shows, and that you've been able to facilitate that kind of standard working hours, I think is a really great step forward. And kind of coming back to this Amdram thing, because I did a lot of Amdram before I sort of went to uni and before I started working professionally in the industry. And it's definitely had a really big impact on what I do now. I wonder sort of how you sort of see your experience of being in Amdram and kind of how that may have impacted what you do or sort of your interest in theatre. So you didn't go and study theatre straight away, you did English. So like, was it always in the back of your mind from the Amdram, or was it just kind of a bit of fun?
It's so interesting because I did Amdram as a kid as well. Like I did it till I was about maybe 14, and I was doing like, a Saturday school. But I never really did anything further than that. And then I sort of dropped off for a bit. And it was only when I came into uni that I sort of had that moment of like, oh, I can still have a go at this. Like it's not, I don't have to stop doing it. And it was all just really, it is kind of just that whim of like, oh, I'll audition for a piece, and if I get in, I get in. Yeah, my experience with Amdram, I did sort of everything while I was there. So I acted, I directed a show, I choreographed a show, and obviously production and stage managed. And I think seeing that in Amdram and how much people who, are doing it just for the love of it, how much they care about it, made me kind of, that's what really pushed me towards theatre, I think, because I was like, these people are here like taking out, we used to do rehearsals on a Sunday for our musical theatre stuff, and it was, a 10 till 6 day, and people used to spend their entire Sunday pretty much in a room, like just learning a show, and they used to love it, and they weren't, no one was being paid to be there, sort of thing. And that really pushed me towards it, because it made me realize that the people going into theatre, especially people of like our generation, are doing it specifically for the love of it. If no one's doing it because they're like, I'm gonna make a ton of money out of this, especially at the beginning. So I was like, wow, this is like so like passionate and so positive. So I think that's what really spearheaded me going into theatre. That's how kind of I ended up there. And I think like doing the collaborative theatre degree, which I did after the year after COVID, was also such a big thing of like, again, seeing that switch from amateur into a sort of professional environment of, oh, like this is the differences, which for me were seeing people. I mean, there was obviously a more seriousness around it as soon as you get into that environment, but also the fact that people were just as passionate, people were just as, dedicated towards making sure the show was like the best it could possibly be. And that was like, it was so interesting to see that.
No, definitely. I think that's something I've taken from Amdram as well, is that, and why I went into the industry, because I do love it, and it was what I loved doing and wanted to do with my spare time. And like you, we did have like Sunday rehearsal. I think we did like Monday nights, Wednesday nights, Sundays all day, and like
Yeah.
it became almost like a second family. And I think that's something that our industry also still does really well at times, is that it does feel like everyone's together and in it for the good of the show as well, rather than,
Yeah,
as you
100%.
said, in it for like individual goals or
Yeah.
money or whatever. And it feels very holistic, I guess, in that sense. One thing I kind of want to touch on that you mentioned, and I did this as well, is that I went to a traditional university, shall we say, before going to a drama school to do a further qualification. What did you find like the main differences were in that training you got? Obviously, you did English rather than theatre, but I think a lot of people watching this will probably be either coming up to that point of looking at university or might be considering training for the arts. And like, what would you say are kind of the pros and cons, or what your experience was of kind of doing both?
I think yeah, the pros and cons. I think the pros of like, doing a sort of English degree and then having theatre as sort of an additional thing that I was doing outside of it was that I mean, the biggest pro was that it felt like weirdly enough for me, felt like a break, because obviously it felt like a break away from the work, which was English. So for me, it really made me actually realize that that was what I loved. In the same way that some people go to university and they do a science degree and they go, this is exactly what I want to do. And then other people go and do the same thing and go, actually, this is complete opposite of what I want to do. But they actually only go into university as the way to realize that. It was the same sort of thing in terms of like doing English and like being like, I love reading and I enjoy like analyzing stuff, but that isn't what I want to do the rest of my life. And doing, working in theatre was actually what I realized. I was like, this is something I could see myself doing for the rest of my life. And then I think for me, doing a master's specifically in collaborative theatre, which I remember when I applied for it, I was like, I'm not sure this could be, maybe this isn't the right thing for me. Maybe I should choose something more specific. And I think for me, it was perfect because it meant that I could have an overview of everything, which is kind of, I guess, what I'm doing now in terms of being a general manager, is that overseeing everything. In terms of collaborative theatre, I learned what it was like to be, even though I didn't work in those roles specifically, I learned how it works to be a designer versus a director, versus the different parts of stage management, versus what it's like being a stage manager, you know, on a big stage versus being you know, a fringe theatre or a kids show. So it's all very like, it was kind of overseeing everything, and that was kind of the biggest pro of going to do that degree. On the other hand, I think I worked at Mount View for about 3 months, 4 months as an administrative assistant, as a stage manager, management assistant, and that meant I got to see how their courses worked as well, which was really interesting as being someone who still where it feels very early career, seeing more people come into the industry through stage management. And their courses were very similar, were much more like rigid in the terms of like, you learn the different aspects of stage management, you learn how each thing works, you learn about production management, and here are the offshoots of things you can learn, but they aren't like things you have to learn. And it was really interesting because I think it meant that I could go, oh, if I'd gone down this route, if I'd gone to maybe Mountain View, if I'd gone to do a stage management course, these are the things I would have learned. But because I went and did this collaborative theatre degree, it meant that I actually got more of an overview of everything. And for me, it's ended up being perfect because it's the sort of thing I like to do, which is kind of oversee how every aspect works versus just knowing the one route.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did a very similar thing. I went to the University of York for my undergraduate degree. I did do theatre, but the course is theatre writing, directing, and performance. So we kind of got that really big overview of kind of all the roles. And it was, especially in the first year, like you try them all separately in different modules. So we were all acting, we were all directing, we were all writing. You could choose to do like stage management, lighting design, set design, producing. And it's where I first found about producing, because I think to me, especially from coming through Amdram, we all just kind of did the producing work to put the show on. I don't think I kind of realized it was a proper job. It was just putting on a show. Like, that's just what you do. I didn't kind of make that connection between, oh no, someone actually does this as a job. And I think doing the course at York was really helpful to really isolate, actually, I'm really terrible at directing. I'm not going to do that. I thought I wanted to be an actor. I enjoy it, but I really hate auditions, so I'm not going to do that. I might just act like go back to Amdram or do other things like that. And then it was sort of the producing and writing and stage management as well, and kind of production management I found I really, really enjoyed. So then with my masters, I wanted to really specify and kind of almost do the opposite of what you did with your masters and really specifically learn about that discipline and all the bits of that my sort of broader degree didn't cover. But they're definitely very different. I think with university, you almost in a sense have a bit more freedom to pick what
100%.
you learn, and like there's so many societies, like I'm sure at Kent there was as well, like that you can be part of that are like
So much,
connected to theatre, completely irrelevant to theatre. Like York had like a Taylor Swift society, they had Octopush, which is like an underwater hockey sport, I think. Like so much you can do.
There's so
Whereas I
much
think,
variety,
yeah, whereas I think drama school is a bit more focused
there was
and a
an
bit more
absolute focus of like, this is
streamlined.
what you were doing, like this is the exact focus you're going to have the pretty much the entire time you are there. And even like having a very varied course still had that thing of like, but no matter what, you will, this is your like end goal, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you're still not sure you want to test the water a bit, I think having that freedom can be really helpful before you kind of then go in and really pick your focus. Speaking of picking, I'm going to ask you, which everyone seems to find a really tricky question, what your favorite project you've worked on has been and why?
It's hard. I was having to think about this, because I was trying to work out, I was trying to go through everything I've ever done and trying to go like, oh God, what is that? And then remembering how many things I've done and trying to remember which one was my favorite. I think for me, I look at it between two things. So I look at like what my favorite as a general manager as of a building, and then what my favorite is as a freelancer. I think as a freelancer, my favorite has been probably Splintered, which I did at the Soho Theatre. It was written and directed by Emily Aboud, about basically about the experience, sort of like a cabaret show about the experiences of queer, I believe it's Caribbean women off the top of my head. And it was just so joyous and so much fun. And the team was so wonderful to work with. And it was one of those shows that even when difficulties came up, everyone would band together and be like, right, how can we fix this? It wasn't just There was never a blame game. There was never a, well, this is your responsibility. Everyone was like, oh, this thing isn't working, we're going to all make sure we get together and make sure it works, or make sure the show goes up and it's the best it can possibly be. And it was just such a joyous experience to be on. And then at 503, having only been there since September now, I believe, I think my favorite has been A Woman Walks into a Bank, which was our 2023 International Playwriting Award winner, which we put on last November, December. And it ended up extending because it sold so well, but it was such a fantastic play to be a part of. It was written and directed by Roxy Cook, which was also amazing because it was a new writer also getting to direct their own show. And it was so interesting to watch that kind of switch you have to go on as being both a writer and director, and knowing like, these are things I want to edit to the script and these are things I want to do as a director, and it was just so exciting to see that come together. And again, it was another show where everyone really banded together and did things that were like out of their comfort zone because they wanted to make sure the show was absolutely the best it could possibly be. Yeah, and it was and as a organization for it to be, I think it was my first like in-house show specifically produced by 503 for 503. It was just such a great, amazing experience to watch everyone come together and be like, we're going to make this show, which is an award winner, the best it can possibly be, and make sure that it gets the praise it deserves and gets the accolades it deserves, which it did. And that was what was really like joyous about putting it on as well.
Brilliant. I think they're two really good shows to pick, and I'm really glad you separated them because it leads on really well to the next I'm going to ask. Just as a reminder, if you're watching this live, you can pop a question for Emily in the Q&A box and I'll ask them at the end. If you're watching on demand, if you pop a question in the comments, I can send them over to Emily and hopefully ping you an answer back at a later date. But for now, I'm going to ask about that separation. So between freelancer and sort of working in a building, what have you found has been sort of the biggest difference switching between the two? And sort of, do you have a favorite method of working sort of between being a freelancer and being sort of contracted at a building?
I find that because I'm in the building so much as my role, like my role is I'm in the building pretty much 5 days a week. There's a lovely physical separation there of going, as soon as I'm in the building, this is my 503 space. And the only time I ever really become a freelancer outside of that 503 space is like during my lunch break, where if I want to, I will choose that time to then go through my other emails for freelance roles I'm doing. But yeah, so for that, I think that's a lovely physical separation. I think as a freelancer as well, it's always the thing of making myself, wanting to give myself a break while also wanting to continue to do the work that I love as a freelancer. So I think for me, the biggest thing I do is I choose the time that I want to work, which outside of my working hours at 503. So if that means on my train in the morning, I'm like, okay, I'm going to use maybe this hour to answer the emails I was going to answer, or I'm going to do that on the way home, or maybe tonight I know that I haven't got much going on, so I'm actually going to use this 2-3 hour period to do the work I need to do that I couldn't do during the day, for maybe it's a really busy day at work sort of thing. I think that's kind of the good thing about having both things. There's obviously the physical separation, but also I kind of enjoy commuting because it gives me the opportunity to like really separate the work from relaxation from other work, and it gives me a proper it feels very individual, each thing, instead of them all getting kind of mushed together.
Nice. I like that. I think that's so important, especially definitely since the pandemic, I think we all work from home much more often. So where previously like production meetings or sort of things like that might have been in person every week, every other week, and you kind of all come together in one place. I think at least all the ones I've been to now have been online, so everyone can join where they are.
Pretty much since I started working, and they've always been online. I think the only time I ever did a non-in-person production meeting was when I worked in Amdram, and that's because you're on university campus sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think it's so nice to kind of almost have that separation when you're actually going out of the house to work, or even if sort of like you are working from home, you have a room that you do that work in, because I think it really helps find that work-life balance. Because with a lot of freelancers, you always hear that it's really hard to find that balance. It's really nice that you're kind of using sort of that physicality create
Yeah.
that. I think that's
Yeah.
really important, because I'm sure, like, I've definitely had times when I first started freelancing
Mhm.
where I would just kind of be working like all the time because
Yeah,
I
I
still
would.
loved
Yeah,
it.
I did that all the time as when I first started freelancing. I was always working. It's also because one of the first jobs I had after graduating was on a cruise ship. So I worked on a cruise ship for about, I think it was about a month, and pretty much the entire time I was there, we were doing night shifts as well. So when I wasn't working, I was sleeping, and then when I wasn't sleeping, I'd go, oh, well, what can I do? Oh, I'll just, I'll probably do some more extra work, or I'll do this because I was in that environment so much, which kind of led to that thing of being like, I'm always working because I'm always here kind of thing. And that's why I think now I'm so much more like, okay, what is this balance between making sure I work at this time, making sure I, have a proper rest, watch some TV, read a book, avoid work for like, even if it's an hour or something.
No, absolutely. And I didn't actually know you worked on a cruise ship, so it was really fun. But you talk about that being one of your first jobs after graduating. Where did you sort of start looking for these roles? So kind of after you've made that transition from being at uni or sort of doing undergrad and extracurricular stuff, where did you go to find these roles straight away? So if you're just starting out, where would be your sort of touch points to find roles?
I was looking at it as two different ways, which is there's obviously the way which I got majority of my jobs on, which is, applying on arts job, going on open hire, and just going, oh, okay, that sounds like something. I think I was unmandy as well, just going, okay, what is on here that I feel I could do and what I'm strong at? Okay, I'm going to apply to it. I can have the availability, and go for it. The other thing I did, which I've started out kind of more as a lucky thing, and then I realized it more as I went along. But um, having done my degree, I'd made a lot of, random connections through other people there. And one of those people was the company who were working on the cruise ship. So because I knew someone on there, they knew someone who worked on there, and they kind of got me in contact. And it was just that kind of, a friend of a friend of a friend. And I think it's very much a thing of nowadays I'm doing it for other people where I'll go, oh, you're looking for a stage manager, I know this person who's fantastic, or you're looking for a producer, I know these people who are fantastic, because you know who you've worked with and you know who to recommend, and it is just about essentially making that really goodwill and doing the best job you can on every job, because you never know, the person you meet could be the person who then goes, hey, I've got another 3 jobs coming up and I need someone to work with me as an assistant, or I just need someone to come and work as crew for 2 days, would you be available? And it's always really interesting because you could work for like a crew as a crew member for like one day on a show, and be like, okay, this was just for an extra, bit of money, or maybe it's to help out a friend. But then you could end up meeting someone there who 2 months later goes, hey, I'm looking for another person to help me on this show, but I need them for a week long. And I think making those connections, even if it's just like, oh, hi, how are you? Your work was really great. I really enjoyed working with you. You kind of know that over working, an 8-hour shift with someone, is whether or not they are, a great person to work with in the theatre industry, because everyone jumps in so quickly. So it is creating that goodwill with people, but also just, yeah, so you can be both recommending people and also being the person who is recommended, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it kind of feeds into that old saying, it's like, it's not what you know, it's who you know, which is
Mm,
both annoying, but also in this sense
100%.
really true. Because I think you don't need to know anyone when you first start, because this is the whole thing that I have
100%.
with networking. Because you are already in a network, like you're saying, the people you met at university or when you were doing your training and things
Yeah,
like that, they
100%.
become your network and you kind of grow with them and they grow
Mm,
alongside you. And you never know that Susan, who you did Amdram with, might one day go on and be someone who's working at a company you're also working at. Like we were lucky enough with Cloudburst, our production company, to go to the Olivier's. And
mm.
I bumped into 3 people I used to do amateur dramatics with in Shrewsbury at the awards,
You're like,
who I'd
oh,
not seen. Yeah, yeah, who I'd not seen for like over 10 years. One of them works for Cameron Mackintosh in their office, and 2 of them are now actors on the West End. And it was just like we all used to do little Amdram shows together, or to be fair, quite big Amdram shows, but Amdram shows together. So it was really nice to see that people I was friends with and just did it for the love of it, and now also working in this industry, and just real
literally,
proof that you
yeah.
don't need to know like You don't need to know Cameron McIntosh. You don't necessarily need to know all the big names. It's the people you're with now who are going to grow and learn with you.
Yeah, I think it's such a big thing where people are sort of like, well, I just need, like, it doesn't matter if, there's sometimes a thing where people are like, oh, but if I work this show, I'm not going to meet anyone. I'm like, but you'll meet 20 people, and half those people are the people at the venue. I mean, for me, working at 503, a lot of the time people like co-producers will come in and say, hey, maybe I'm looking for a stage manager, or oh, have you got any like sound designer recommendations? And like and on both a personal level and also like a professional level as a venue, I'll sometimes be like, oh, well, I know a friend of mine or someone I've worked with before has some availability next month. Let me see if they're available, sort of thing. And you've got that sort of connection as both a freelancer and a venue to go, okay, let me just double check. And I think being able to go, use your own connection and your venue connection and like everything else is such a like positive thing in order to make those like relationships last.
Absolutely. And then I'm going to round off with the questions I'm asking. If anyone has got any questions, pop them in. If not, don't worry. With what your biggest piece of advice to someone who wants to start work in the industry would be?
For me, and it's advice I got from Ben Wallace, who ran my course, is basically have a go at everything if you can. Because even though, like, for example, I don't know how to like properly program lights, but I've learned enough that if someone said I just need a state on, I can do that. Or I know how if someone's unavailable to do something, I can read a lighting plan and go, oh, okay, I think I know where these lights go and such and such. And being able to just kind of understanding the language, understanding the, terms and stuff, which when you first start is so scary because I think my biggest thing is always whenever people are like, oh, I'm so worried about making a fool of myself. I always say in my first production meeting at uni, where pretty much everyone else came from a background of doing theatre degrees and gone to do a master's, and I was like one of maybe 2 or 3 people who hadn't. Someone was like, oh, we're going to do the show End On. And I was like, I don't know what end on means. And I just asked, and I was like, and I felt like such an idiot at the time. And now I'm like, oh, now I give it as advice to everyone because I'm like, just ask because it just asking a question and then suddenly everything opens up because as soon as I learned the word what end on meant, my brain went, oh, everything else you've been saying makes sense to me because before I didn't have that information. So I think for me, just knowing like obviously get stuck in as much as you can if someone's like and do what you can. The other thing is also in regards to that is also being safe while doing that. Never take on too much. I've done that. I'm sure everyone has done that in some time where you go, I'll take on these 4 things at once and I'll be completely fine. And then halfway through, you're like, maybe this was a bad idea. But it's always great to like get stuck in. Like if you can get in, especially on an early career, if you can get in for a fringe show and just, oh, can I just watch? Like, can I just sit in the audience and watch them put up some lights? And something about that will just make you go, oh, okay, this is what it is to do, put up a lighting rig in 2 hours, or this is what it is to make a set safe for a venue, like that kind of thing. I think just getting stuck in is such a positive thing to do.
Perfect. Oh, thank you so much, Emily. That is great advice that I would absolutely mirror. And also, I think you never know what you're going to enjoy or be really good at. It might be something that you never thought of or that's slightly obscure.
Yeah.
But you'll be there and you'll learn it. So
yeah,
fabulous.
I did that with QLab. Well, I started on, I never had even heard of the word QLab when I started my degree. And then by the end of it, I was not only operating, but I could program. And I did. I was like, and now every time someone's like, oh, do you know how to like program a QLab? I'm like, yeah, I can do that for you. It'll take me this much long, da da da. And it's so great to be able to offer that to someone because I've learned that skill already.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. We don't have any questions in the question tab, so I am going to call it a day. But thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you or your work or 503 online and find out all your stuff?
You can find 503 on our website, which is just theatre503.com, where you can find pretty much everything about us on there and all about the new writing we have going on. For me, where can you find me? Probably on LinkedIn, actually, is the best place to find me at the moment. And all the bits I'm doing, but also on social media. If you reach out to me on Instagram or Twitter, usually, or X, I can always get back to people in the best way I possibly can. And especially even if it's just like coming to see a show, we have invites at 503, and I know a lot of people are sometimes like, how do I get involved? If you want, just invite us to your show, and if it's possible, we will see if we can get someone to come and see you.
Perfect. Oh, thank you so much. And if you wanted to watch back or ask any other questions, and this goes live on demand, it will be up on YouTube. Thanks, guys.